But the fact is that if we see the Bill of Rights as a moral document and we assess the Bill of Rights and the American Civil Liberties Union today, we are a little more than 200 years into the history of the Bill of Rights, and we are 75 years into the history of the ACLU today. And it is the right time to do an assessment, especially since we are facing such a reactionary attempt to roll back a lot of our victories. And this is the right moment for a mutual assessment. It is important to remember again that the Bill of Rights was a great document when it was enacted in 1791, but it was also a flawed document, and it didn't work. It was a flawed document because it left out African Americans entirely, as well as American Indians, neither of whom were considered to be human. It was a flawed document because it left out women, who were considered human, but human property of a sort. They didn't even have the right to vote. What equal citizenship? What morality? And the Bill of Rights didn't work real well for anybody else either. In 1920, when the ACLU was created, 130 years after the Bill of Rights was adopted, 2/3 of our bicentennial period, the Bill of Rights hardly worked at all. Not only was racial segregation still firmly cemented into the laws of this country in a way nobody thought could be changed, but women still didn't have the right to vote. They didn't get that until later that year, after 70 years of struggle. The separation of church and state was there on paper, but there wasn't too many schools in this country that didn't impose majoritarian prayer against traditional family values, against the notion that the family has the prerogative for deciding the religious upbringing of their children, not the government. That principle was violated every day in thousands of places in this country in 1920. And in free speech, people were busted all the time for meeting, for distributing leaflets, for organizing labor unions. Thousands of people during the protest against America's entrance into World War I were arrested for protesting. Books were prosecuted. People were put into jail for publishing pamphlets. The foreign-born were deported in the dead of night. In 1920, when the ACLU was created, the Supreme Court had never struck down a single statute or governmental act on First Amendment grounds. 2/3 of our bicentennial history. In 1925, John Scopes was tried as a criminal for teaching evolution in the schools of Dayton, Tennessee. And in 1924, Congress passed a racist act of immigration called the National Origins Exclusion Act. I don't think that was its exact name, but that certainly was its exact intention and its effect, which barred people from immigrating into this country pretty much except for Northwestern Europe. That was a reaction to the racist reaction to the floods of immigration in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it was not undone until 1965, when a new Immigration Act, passed at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, passed in the same year that the Voting Rights Act was passed, undid those racial and national origin exclusions. And we are today fighting the reaction to that 1965 Civil Rights Act. So 1920, when the ACLU was created, was a time when the Bill of Rights still wasn't working. Much of it was nice on paper, but it didn't actually work the way Madison and Jefferson intended. Well, the ACLU did something about that, and so did the NAACP, and so did the labor unions. They provided organized support for the victims of the violations of rights, when the victims themselves did not have the resources or the capacity to even get into court. They provided organizational resources and power at a time when they didn't have much themselves. The ACLU started with 30 or 40 people in a room in New York. The NAACP with fewer. We were not ever in the halls of power.